The glass broke before anyone said a word. Light fell from the chandeliers like pale rain, and the room made a small gasp. Crystal kissed the marble and skittered into a bright ring near the stage. For a second, the gala froze utterly. Music held a single note. In that thin silence, power stood tall and dignity bent. Amara held the tray against her ribs. She was steady, the way people are steady when they cannot afford to shake. The tray was silver and cold. She moved through golden tables with quiet steps, a soft rhythm under the loud sparkle of wealth. Victoria watched her approach. She wore a dress that caught the light and threw it back like a dare. People looked to see what she would find funny tonight. "Careful," Victoria said, pointing at the ring of glass. "Some people cannot carry anything fragile." The crowd's smile thinned. The comment floated, polished and cruel. Few guests made that small sound people make when they enjoy danger from a safe seat. Amara felt heat in her face, but her hands did not move. She set a fresh glass near Victoria's plate. Victoria leaned back like a queen at rest. "Do you understand instructions?" she asked slow and loud. "Or is this level of service too high for you?" Another glass on a nearby tray trembled. The chandeliers hummed. The band tried to find the beat and failed. It was not music now. It was a clock. Amara lifted the bottle with care. The wine poured as a thin red line, steady as a promise. She did not spill. She did not speak. She had learned long ago that silence can be armor when words are used as knives. Victoria scanned the table for witnesses. "Look," she told them, "this is what I mean by standards. Some people never learn precision." The red line stopped at the right point. Amara set the bottle down. She took one step back and waited, shoulders straight, eyes on a private horizon. A woman lowered her phone. Two servers looked at the floor. The moment gathered weight like storm air. Victoria lifted the new glass, tilted it, then set it down hard. The stem held, but the sound was a small threat. "Tell me," she said, "is this your first night in a real venue?" The insult crossed the room and settled like dust. Amara felt it land, but she did not let it sink. She remembered a voice from home. "Dignity is a crown you polish in private. No one can snatch it if you do not hand it over." A server near the door stepped forward, then stopped. The band found its note and started a low, cautious song. Victoria waited for laughter. When it did not come, she made her own and filled the space with it. She waved toward the shattered circle. "Clean that," she said, "and try not to break the broom." Amara knelt and gathered the pieces with a towel. Each shard caught a star from the chandelier and gave it back. The towel grew heavy with light. The room watched the way people watch a fall that has not yet happened. When she stood, the tray was level. The towel was folded. Her face was calm. The circle on the floor was gone, but the circle of eyes remained tight and unblinking. Under their gaze, Amara held herself still. She offered no words for judgment to hold. She endured, silent and unbroken, while the room measured her with its stare. The room gleamed like a stage dressed for perfection, but stages always hide their cracks. Crystal chandeliers rained light across velvet drapes. Laughter moved from table to table like rehearsed music, each note designed to assure the crowd that wealth was not just earned, it was performed. Victoria understood that performance better than anyone. She did not walk through the gala. She owned it with each step. Her voice cut through conversations like polished glass, sharp and deliberate. Every remark she made was less about humor and more about dominance. Laughter in her hands was a blade. When she leaned toward a guest, her tone rose just enough to be heard by others nearby. Jokes were coated with charm, but the sting underneath was never hidden. A man's tie became a mistake of color. A woman's bracelet was a child's toy wrapped in silver. People smiled on cue, though their eyes betrayed discomfort. To resist her was to risk being her next target. The gala was a gallery of masks. Men adjusted them with careful sips of wine. Women secured theirs with practiced nods. Every guest wore one. Masks of courtesy, masks of admiration, masks of fear disguised as respect. It was safer to keep the mask on than to risk the cut of Victoria's laughter. Yet beneath the polished surface, unease rippled. A young couple whispered about leaving early. A board member's smile lingered too long, stiff as painted wood. Waiters moved quietly, eyes lowered as though contact itself might invite ridicule. Victoria mistook silence for agreement. She mistook uneasy smiles for devotion. Her world had long taught her that power was proven not in kindness but in control. And tonight, she displayed it as if it were an heirloom jewel, polished and unchallengeable. The chandeliers reflected her confidence. The tables echoed her authority. And the guests, trapped in their roles, played along with the performance of wealth, each mask another layer of protection against being singled out. As the night deepened, Victoria's laughter grew louder, richer, more certain. She was convinced that no truth could touch her, no slip could expose her. Power in her mind was not fragile like glass. It was permanent, unbreakable. She believed she was untouchable. Silence can speak louder than the sharpest insult. Amara stood in her plain uniform, the fabric pressed but simple, stitched for function rather than beauty. The room around her glittered with sequins and silk, the clash of wealth against her quiet presence as clear as light against shadow. Victoria's gown shimmered like it had been poured from liquid gold, every thread demanding attention. Yet in that same light, Amara's plain attire became a symbol, not of weakness but of contrast. The tray in her hands trembled with the weight of crystal glasses. The silver surface reflected the chandeliers above, but it also reflected her eyes, steady, unbroken. The music from the band drifted through the hall, smooth and practiced. But to Amara it sounded thin. Each note clashed against the cruelty she had just endured, as if the instruments themselves struggled to drown out injustice. Her silence stretched across the table, and it carried more power than words. She remembered her mother's voice from years ago, spoken in a dim kitchen where cracked tiles bore witness to hardship. Dignity is the one crown no one can take. They will try to strip you of many things, but not that. Those words had stayed with her, carved into her like stone. They rose again now, a shield against the ridicule that pressed in from every corner of the gala. Guests shifted in their seats, some uncomfortable, some eager for distraction. Victoria leaned back in triumph, convinced she had reduced the waitress to nothing. But Amara's stillness was not nothing. It was resistance in its purest form. She carried her silence like armor, refusing to meet cruelty with collapse. Her mind drifted to her younger brother at home, studying late under a single lamp. She thought of her father, gone too soon, and of her mother who had held the family together with nothing more than quiet endurance. Their lessons lived in her posture. Their sacrifices lived in her breath. She adjusted the tray, the silver edge catching the faintest tremor of her hand. The glasses chimed softly, fragile notes that dared to survive in the air. The sound was small, but it was a reminder. Not every break leaves someone powerless. Around her, the masks of the wealthy stayed fixed, smiles painted, eyes shifting. They saw a servant bow her head, but they did not see the strength behind it. They saw humility, but they missed the storm gathering beneath. Amara bowed, not from defeat, but from choice. Her silence pressed heavier than any spoken protest. It gathered weight with every second, a quiet truth the room would soon be forced to face. Whispers moved through the hall like smoke, thin, curling, and impossible to catch. The gala pressed on under chandeliers that still shone as if nothing had changed. Waiters carried trays. The band played its polished tune, and laughter returned in fragments. Yet beneath the glamour, something darker stirred. The crowd had witnessed cruelty, and their reactions split like glass under pressure. At one table, a man shook his head quietly. "Uncalled for," he murmured, though his voice never rose above the clink of cutlery. At another, a woman leaned toward her companion, smiling faintly as if it were all entertainment. "She's fearless," the woman said, as though arrogance were courage. Most guests chose the safer ground, silence. Their faces carried masks of approval, but their eyes betrayed discomfort. The easy choice was to pretend nothing had happened, to laugh politely, to move on. In the corner of the room, however, sat someone different, not a CEO, not a guest of honor, but a young journalist invited by chance, a late addition to the guest list, seated away from the glow of power. His suit was neat but plain, his notebook tucked inside a worn leather bag. He was used to being overlooked. That was why he noticed everything. He had watched the moment when Amara bowed her head. He had heard the laughter that followed, sharp as broken crystal. And he had seen the way silence spread, heavy and complicit. To him, the gala was not just a celebration of wealth. It was a stage where the true character of power revealed itself. The whispers carried questions no one dared to voice aloud. Should someone say something? It's not our place. She'll only make it worse. The questions circled the tables, unanswered, until they faded back into the polished rhythm of the evening. But one question remained, unspoken yet urgent. Who speaks when dignity is crushed? The journalist's eyes moved from Victoria, basking in her own triumph, to Amara, steady in her silence. He felt the weight of the moment pressing against him. Around him, the crowd chose masks. He chose memory. He knew that silence tonight would not remain in this room. It would echo beyond it. He reached for his phone. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted it above the table. The lens caught the chandeliers, the stage, and the figure of a waitress standing unbroken in her silence. The whispers fell quiet as the screen began to glow. Truth did not leave the room quietly, it slipped out. Through a screen, the journalist's fingers moved quickly. His phone angled low against the glow of the chandeliers. With a few taps, the moment was no longer trapped in marble walls and crystal light. It had entered the endless corridors of the digital world, where silence could not contain it. The post went live. The caption was short, the video uncut. Cruelty did not need commentary. It carried its own evidence. At first, nothing seemed to change. The music carried on, polished and soft. Waiters continued their rounds, silver trays balanced with care. But slowly a ripple spread across the tables. Phones lit up one by one, their cold glow cutting through the golden haze of the gala. Guests leaned toward their screens, brows furrowing, lips tightening. The glow became a new mirror, reflecting not chandeliers but truth. Conversations broke into fragments. "Is this already online?" whispered a man in a dark suit. His companion showed him her phone, the video already gathering comments. A woman gasped softly, not at what she saw, she had already witnessed it, but at the speed with which it spread. What had been a moment of discomfort now became a public record. Victoria continued her performance unaware. She laughed too loudly, gestured too broadly, certain the spotlight belonged to her alone. She believed the silence of the room meant control. She never noticed the way the silence had changed, turning from submission to unease. The contrast deepened. The chandeliers still poured down golden light, yet faces around the tables were lit in blue-white, the color of truth carried by screens. The gala, built to showcase wealth and power, had become a stage for exposure. Some guests put their phones face down, unwilling to confront what they had just seen replayed. Others held theirs close, scrolling through reactions as though checking for judgment. A few whispered of investors, headlines, and reputations. The performance of wealth cracked as the performance of truth began. The video traveled faster than any toast, faster than any speech. In seconds it had left the gala, entered the city, and begun its climb into public sight. The room was no longer private. It was a theater with invisible rows of witnesses beyond its walls, but Victoria, still at the center, remained blind to it. She raised her glass, smiling at her reflection in the crystal. She thought she was untouchable. She did not see that her empire was already cracking in real time. 5 minutes can break an empire. At first, Victoria floated in her own illusion. The chandeliers still crowned her with light, and the orchestra's soft strings seemed to play just for her. She believed her words had landed with the weight she intended, that laughter had confirmed her authority. But in those 5 minutes, the air in the room shifted. Across the hall, a board member's phone buzzed against the linen tablecloth. He glanced down, frowning at the screen. The subject line was simple. "Have you seen this?" He clicked. The video filled his phone. His face drained as he watched Victoria's voice echo through the device, cutting down the very waitress who now stood silent at the edge of the room. Another investor's phone lit up. Then another. Within seconds, the sound of polite conversation thinned into uneasy murmurs. The music no longer matched the mood. It sounded out of place, like an old record skipping while the world turned. The countdown had begun. Minute 1. Phones vibrated across the tables. Men and women bent their heads in unison, faces lit by the cold blue of their screens. The chandeliers glowed gold above, but the truth spread in silver light below. The contrast was stark. Wealth performed in gold, exposure delivered in blue. Minute 2, whispers sharpened. "What is this video?" a woman asked, her voice clipped, urgent. A man on the board excused himself to answer a call, but his eyes never left Victoria. Across the room, a younger guest shook her head, whispering, "It's already everywhere." Minute 3, the gala fractured. Guests shifted in their seats, no longer focused on the stage or the wine. Some leaned toward each other, screens held close, voices lowered in panic. Others sat back, watching Victoria with new eyes, eyes that measured risk, reputation, and survival. Minute 4. Victoria laughed at a joke of her own making. The sound rang hollow. She did not see the gap widening between herself and the people she thought loyal. She raised her glass, expecting the room to follow, but half the guests' hands stayed on their phones. Minute 5. The silence fell. Not the silence of awe, but the silence of judgment. One by one, the conversations ended. Forks paused above plates. The music faltered, the band sensing the shift without knowing its cause. Every eye turned toward her, not with admiration, but with distance. Victoria felt it then. The warmth of control drained, replaced by the cold stare of isolation. She looked around the room, at board members whispering into phones, at investors avoiding her gaze, at guests who no longer smiled. For the first time, she realized the spotlight had turned against her. The empire she had built on arrogance and fear was crumbling, not with a crash, but with 5 minutes of quiet exposure. And in that silence, she understood she was cornered. Power can vanish faster than applause. Victoria felt the room slipping away from her. The silence that surrounded her was no longer obedience. It was judgment. She tried to break it the only way she knew, with laughter. "Oh, come on," she said, waving her hand as if brushing off dust. "It was just a little fun. You all know me, I like to joke." Her smile widened, but no one returned it. The laughter that once followed her like a shadow had deserted her. She shifted in her chair, voice tightening. People are too sensitive these days. A harmless remark, and suddenly it's a scandal. Honestly, what is the world coming to? Across the table, one of her board members checked his phone, then stood. Without a word, he moved to another group, putting space between them. An investor followed, excusing himself with a forced smile. The space around her widened, the way people step back from fire when the flames grow wild. Victoria raised her glass, desperate. "We can't let outsiders twist this." "You know me. You know my record. This is nothing." But the more she spoke, the more her words sounded hollow, like glass struck too many times. She turned to the crowd with a softer tone, an attempt at charm. "Don't tell me you've never teased someone before. Really, you all understand. It's part of the game." Her eyes searched for nods of agreement. None came. Faces looked down at their screens, away from her gaze. The golden light of chandeliers no longer favored her. It only sharpened the coldness of rejection. Her hand trembled as she adjusted her bracelet, a piece of jeweled metal worth more than most salaries. The clasp slipped. The bracelet slid off her wrist and landed on the table with a dull sound. For a moment it sparkled in the light, then lay still, useless. Wealth, polished and heavy, could not hold her together. Panic cracked through her voice. "Please, listen to me. You've known me for years. I built this company. I made it strong." But investors were already exchanging quiet words, their faces tight with calculation. She reached out as if to pull them back, but they stepped farther away. Her performance collapsed. The strength in her voice drained until only pleading remained. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded. It was a mistake. I swear it was just a moment." Her eyes darted across the room, seeking rescue, but every guest she turned to recoiled from her desperation. Finally, her gaze fell on Amara. The waitress stood steady, tray at her side, posture unbroken. The silence of the room seemed to circle her like a crown. Victoria's voice broke. "You please forgive me." "I didn't mean to. Please say something." She reached toward Amara, not with command, but with need. Her power drained to its last drop. The room held its breath. The plea echoed, hollow and raw against the marble walls. No answer came. Only silence, heavy, unbending, remained. The room waited for Amara's answer, but none came. She did not move, did not speak. She stood with her tray at her side, her shoulders straight, her eyes steady. The silence around her was no longer the silence of shame. It was the silence of strength. Where words might have crumbled, her stillness carried weight. Victoria's plea hung in the air, fragile and unanswered. The glitter of her gown had dulled, the power in her posture broken. All her wealth, all her titles had folded in on themselves within minutes. What once seemed unshakable had collapsed in plain sight, but Amara's crown remained invisible, unpolished, yet unbroken. The one her mother had spoken of years before in that quiet kitchen lived now in her stance. Dignity is the one crown no one can take. Tonight those words became flesh. Around the hall, guests began to shift. At first, small gestures, an older man nodding quietly in Amara's direction, a young woman setting down her phone and offering the faintest clap. The sound was soft, barely heard above the weight of silence, yet it spread. Another joined, then another. Not a roar of applause, but a ripple of recognition. For the first time that night, masks began to slip. No one looked at Victoria. Their eyes found Amara. Their applause was not for her uniform, not for her duty, but for the dignity she had refused to surrender. It was a subtle rebellion, a way of breaking complicity without words. The chandeliers glowed as they always had, but now they seemed less like ornaments of power and more like witness lights, marking the fall of arrogance and the quiet rise of endurance. The narrator's truth cut through the scene. Wealth can collapse in seconds, but dignity outlasts humiliation. Gold fades, glass breaks, applause turns cold. Yet dignity, silent, patient, steady, remains. Amara bowed her head once more, but this time it was not in defeat. It was acknowledgement, a gentle acceptance of the crown that had always been hers. And as Victoria sat in silence, stripped of her false armor, the lesson was complete.